constitutional court was dealing with, 3 petitions were filed. And I must mention about those unsung heroes. The first petition came from the Wildlife Board and its chairman. It was regarding refusal by the Capital Development Authority to allow the shifting of a bear from the zoo to the Balkasar sanctuary. The second unsung hero was a medical practitioner, Dr. Umar. He had sought a writ against the government regarding the deplorable conditions in which Kawan the elephant was being held. And the third came from another enthusiast citizen, Miss Faryal, which was regarding the cruel treatment in which stray dogs were killed. These 3 petitions were clubbed. The difficulty for the court was that there was no jurisprudence. I surveyed the jurisprudence from across the country. By then, the jurisprudence that had evolved was from Argentina, the United States, and India. The Indian Supreme Court, regarding the religious event, had given a judgment and had extended the right to life under their constitution's Article 21 to the animals, in this case the cows. However, later the same Supreme Court recalled that judgment, set it aside. In Argentina, there were 2 judgments. One was regarding limited rights being granted in case of an orangutan, and the other in case of a chimpanzee. But they had only restricted it to the chimpanzee because they made it relatable to the attributes of chimpanzee with the humans. In the United States, there were judgments regarding chimpanzees, a horse named Justice, and then the classic case was that of Happy, the elephant incarcerated in the Bronx Zoo. But in all these cases, though the courts in the United States acknowledged that they were sentient beings, they could feel joy, they could feel pain, that they were not objects. But they didn't grant relief on the ground that under their constitution they were not persons. It is ironic that all the constitutions have been framed in the context of regulating humans and in context of the human rights. It was this personhood which held them back. In our case, though there was only this one petition which related to Kawan the elephant. But I was of a different view. In the background were all those human rights violations that I had dealt with. And I could see how important it was to recognize the rights of the non-human animals. What was the story of Kawan? That is most interesting. In the 1980s, there was a very repressive martial law in this country, ruled by General Zia-ul-Haq. I don't know how many of you are aware of the atrocities that and human rights violations that took place then. I don't know whether you are aware of the colony textile mill incident in Multan, where more than 100 innocent laborers who were raising a voice for their demands were massacred. There were students in Sindh, and the Thori Junction incident regrettably is not known to anyone, where students were massacred. An elected Prime Minister was unconstitutionally removed and sent to the gallows, for which the Supreme Court after 40 years regretted.
Sir, can I briefly interrupt, sir? Actually, there are time limitations. 3 baje session khatam hona tha.
I'll conclude very quickly. Why I'm explaining this, that the same General Zia-ul-Haq made a request to the Sri Lankan government that his child wanted an elephant. 1-year-old Kawan was abducted, and it had all the attributes of enforced disappearance, and brought and kept for a while in the backyard of General Zia-ul-Haq's house. And then when Kawan started growing up, a zoo was established. And in that zoo, by the time the petition came before me, there were other 878 non-human animals. And they all were kept in deplorable conditions. The jurisprudence referred to and the judgment referred to built its jurisprudence on one sole ground, because for a right to exist, there has to be something of intrinsic value which needs to be protected. And that intrinsic value, that thing of intrinsic value, was life. And life was not restricted, is not restricted to humans. And that is what gave recognition for the first time across the globe to the rights of animals. And that is not the only judgment. The most difficult part was to implement that judgment. The implementation, because as a judge I had learned one thing, that the most important thing for a court is to implement its judgment. The then government ironically resisted the judgment. The chairman who had of the Wildlife Board, who had filed that first petition, was removed by the government for supporting the judgment and for refusing to file a review petition. The review petition was filed by a ministry of the federal government, the Ministry of Climate Change. That was the second judgment I had to render. Again, there was resistance. And the resistance came from everywhere. But the animal rights and this judgment of the Islamabad High Court resonated with the youth. It was the millennium generation, the alpha generation, and the youngest generation who highlighted the judgment and the audience on the social media, which attracted the attention of the prominent singer of the United States, Cher. And when she stepped in, the government of Pakistan surrendered. Internationally, it became a news. She was the one who arranged for relocation of Kavan to Cambodia. The two bears were relocated to a sanctuary in Jordan, and all other animals, in compliance with the jurisprudence of the High Court, were shifted to their sanctuaries. This had never happened anywhere else in the world. And now I'll take a very short, I don't know how many of you have heard about Otter Banga. Has anybody heard about Otter Banga? Can you raise your hand? It's about human history. It's about lives without a voice. It is about human behavior. Otter Banga was 12 or 13 years old child, and in 1904 he was abducted by a United States trader, Samuel Werner, and he was brought to New Orleans to be shown at a fair along with 8 other young people abducted from there. From 9th of September 1906 till the 28th of September 1906, Otter Banga was exhibited in the Bronx Zoo, and the New York Times had a headline on 9th of March inviting people to come and see a human who was being treated as a non-human. Cruelty to animals is a symptom of power without accountability. And that only happens in a society where fear, where oppression, and where there's a lack of respect of human rights. When humans do not have rights, animals are at the lowest rung of power. The entire, I'm grateful to the coordinator. The presentation only speaks volumes for our society. And human rights today, look at, I explained the background of Kavan. In a repressive, authoritarian society, compassion, empathy, and care becomes optional. It is not for the weaker classes. And when the elite act with impunity and its own interest, the most weakest are the victims. And the weakest possessing a life is an animal. We as a society have to put an end to normalization of violence. When everyone sees everyday violence against humans, animals do not matter. And what has to put really, it's my generation, whatever damage it could have do to this country has almost, but at least we owe it to the younger people to whom we would be shifting the baton to at least tell them the truth. And why I say that there is normalization of violence, because what happened yesterday to two young lawyers who have been declared as terrorists, this does not happen in a democratic state where we claim that it is governed under the Constitution. Violence is normalized when someone like Dr. Yasmeen Rashid, who's 70 years old, cancer suffers because she is a prisoner of conscience. But this has happened throughout our history. We need to learn. And yes, animal advocacy is extremely important. It challenges the authoritarian system. It is non-partisan, but it teaches the citizens in thinking in terms of rights. I am grateful to the coordinator for giving me this time, but we can only move forward. And the day when there are no voices that we can claim to be voiceless, that is when Pakistan will not see any cruelty to animals. Thank you so much.